Let's bring in Lis Smith to get the conversation started. Lis, thanks so much for joining us.
From your rustic background, Lis, we really like it.
I'm in upstate New York right now. I want to get out of this city, but it doesn't have, it's very relaxing, but it does not have the best lighting. And I do have some interesting decor behind me.
I do like it, and we won't hold you responsible for it. So, okay, this could take up all 20 minutes, but let's start with a kind of simple question. You've spent your last, you worked for Pete Buttigieg when he was running for the DNC chair. You've been with him on and off, obviously, for a long time. How did he do it? How did you do it? Give us, for the people who are watching who are kind of fascinated by his rise, what was the secret in, a minute or two?
A minute or two. Okay. So when Pete announced his exploratory committee, we knew he had absolutely no name ID. We knew he had absolutely no national fundraising base, and that the only thing that he had equal access to as every other candidate, and that he needed, and the only thing that could be his path toward, winning the nomination or even just getting his name out there was earned media. It also just so happened that, he's a really good communicator. He's very calm. He's very poised. He's very thoughtful. He gives really interesting answers. And so we just had a strategy of just go everywhere. And I think we also understood that, a lot of presidential campaigns think that the game is played and won on cable news. Well, guess what? The majority of Americans don't watch cable news. So we made a point of going on entertainment outlets like TMZ Live, of hitting up well-trafficked podcasts like Pod Save America, Stay Tuned with Preet Bharara, things like that. And we tried really just to make sure that no matter what channel you were tuning into, whether it was your local newspaper, cable news, Bill Maher's show, The Daily Show, these podcasts, that some way or another you were going to hear from Pete Buttigieg, or at least hear his name. And that's really how we took off. And then, so we sort of laid this groundwork, right? And then we had that star turn. He had that star turn at the CNN town hall. And because we laid that groundwork, it allowed us to really take off.
Yeah, I always think, it was such a different playbook than certainly Hillary Clinton, but even when you look at what Joe Biden's doing now, right? He was kind of flooding the airways and seemed seemingly very comfortable in that environment. You recently wrote an op-ed in the New York Times with your advice for Joe Biden about how his campaign could read campaign trail and effective campaigning in the era of the coronavirus. For the few people out there who didn't read us, tell us how Biden emerges from the basement, here to win.
Right. So there is this sort of, and I think maybe the conventional wisdom has gone away, but there was a conventional wisdom for a long time that Joe Biden was screwed because he was stuck in the basement. Because of public health constraints, all of that. But the point that I was making in my op-ed is that the death of the traditional campaign and, being forced to campaign from his Delaware basement could actually be the best thing that has happened to Joe Biden in this campaign. And that's for a few reasons. One, I think the way that we traditionally campaign is really out of date, really inefficient, really expensive, and really exhausting. On any given day, you spend millions of dollars on just a handful of events, and they're really exhausting for candidates. They could wake up at home, do a few, sort of rallies in Wisconsin, then fly off to San Francisco and close out their day with a big dollar fundraising event. And that's exhausting for anyone, let alone a 77-year-old candidate. I also just don't think it's particularly efficient. From his basement in Delaware, we know that Joe Biden has to reach 3 states, right, to get to 270, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan. He can hit the local news from there without having to travel. A few other points I made in there is that this gives us the opportunity to rethink how conventions are done. Again, expensive, out of date, time-consuming affairs, and also gives him an opportunity to really use surrogates to help his campaign. Because think about it, they're all stuck at home too, and they all need something to do. And if it means just doing what we're doing here and having them call into Zoom into local media, that's a way that they can be helpful and effective, and they don't even have to drive to a TV studio. So my op-ed is basically just about how we rethink the way we communicate, and probably can innovate and make presidential campaigns more efficient going forward.
So you were just on Morning Joe a second ago, and you said conventions are the TV version of Ambien. As I mentioned a minute ago, I tend to agree with you. And you said they're overrated in their ability to fundamentally shift the dynamics of a race, which has proved itself to be true the last two cycles. You didn't offer any specific prescription about how to change conventions. And I want to dig in a little bit on what you think, if you were at the controls today, what you would do to rethink the convention and reimagine the convention.
So I know what I know, and I know what I don't know. I am not myself. I think I'm very good at the media. I'm very good at understanding that. But I also know that we have a lot of creative voices in this party and in this country that we should be harnessing. And I've seen some of the ideas thrown out there. Lis Smith, who had worked, did digital work for Pete Buttigieg, cited the other day how, Travis Scott's takeover of Fortnite, and how that was a really creative way to think about it. That if we could do that with Joe Biden, Joe Biden projected against the Grand Canyon, that might be a little bit ambitious, but we could have exclusive, musical content from some of the biggest musical, artists in the game at these, driving eyeballs to these conventions so that people watch them. It doesn't just have to be these speeches. We could have interviews, we could have documentaries, we could have, short movies. And I think that there are a lot of different ways that we could be thinking about it. And really just any variety would be better than what we've been giving people thus far, which is 3 hours of very on message, robotic speeches from politicians. And just to go back to your point, Jake, is when you think about, I try to think back on conventions and the most memorable moments. And maybe I can think of one or two per year, like Khizr Khan in 2016, Sarah Palin in 2008, Barack Obama in 2004. Those are all big emotional moments, but none of them swayed the elections for their party. And so I think that we've got to sort of break with the way we've been doing things in the past, and we can make these a little looser, a little more entertaining, because if these things are putting you and me to sleep, Jake, then just imagine if you're a regular voter, you got a family, you got a job, you're tired, you get home from work, like why on earth would you spend any time watching these? Like, why do you care about some random senator from a state that has no connection to your life and what they have to say? You don't.
Right. And frankly, no one's looking for a bunch of, maybe they are. I don't think many people are looking for a bunch of policy speeches in prime time. I mean, right. If you're tuning in, you either like the guy or hate the guy. And I just think I hear you on that. I totally hear you on that. Anna knows well my disdain for the convention. So Anna, before I get carried away, why don't you take it away?
Yes, we can spend the rest of our time here just talking about how Jake does not like conventions. But seriously, like sitting here today, what's your read, Liz, on the race? What percentage chance do you give Joe Biden to win?
Well, I see the same polls you do. And Joe Biden right now looks like he's in a strong position against Donald Trump. But keep in mind, 4 years ago, Hillary Clinton was in a strong position, if not stronger than Joe Biden is. And that's why, that's sort of the point that I made in my piece, which is that we can't rest on our laurels here. I think to some extent we did in 2016. And there's a theory in the Democratic Party that if we just kept giving Donald Trump rope, that he would eventually hang himself. Well, he didn't. And I think it's completely wishful thinking to think that he's just going to self-destruct and that we can just run against Trump and Trumpism. And, a good example of sort of the counterpoint to that is look at the Democrats who won in 2018. Andy Kim in New Jersey, Colin Allred in Texas, people like that, Lauren Underwood in Illinois. These are not, the AOC types or Rashida Tlaib. These are Democrats who ran, they were opposed to Donald Trump, but they were not, yelling and screaming from the rafters about how Donald Trump was a tyrant or whatever it is. They offered an alternative view for the Democratic Party, holding up how we could improve healthcare, and making sure that they really did have a positive and affirmative vision for the country. And I think that sort of provides a path forward for Joe Biden, which is not making this all about Trump derangement syndrome, and actually focusing on ways that the Democratic Party can make people's lives better. And we did see, obviously that helped. Obviously that worked because Democrats won back the House. And those are the types of districts that we'll need to, and the types of places we'll need to win if we're going to win back the White House.
What you just said is interesting, because I've long thought, and a lot of Democrats think that, and it shapes our view, that since Democrats tend to make everything about some sort of kind of intense hatred of Trump and everything he does is the end of the world, I think a lot of people, that loses its bite with a lot of people, and people don't take the message seriously enough.
Right. Well, but also, what are you going to tell people about Donald Trump at this point? I mean, that guy is so defined, and you see that in how little his numbers budge. And it's like, if you think he's repugnant, if you don't already think he's repugnant, what new fact is going to come out that's going to make you think he's, morally or intellectually repugnant? I'm sorry. I don't think there's anything else that we can put out there that will turn people off from Donald Trump. I think his handling of the coronavirus could turn some people off who might have otherwise been inclined to sit it out or vote for him. But Democrats have to give people reason to vote for them. And we saw that worked in 2017 in the off-year elections in Virginia and New Jersey. We saw that worked in 2018. So let's look at what worked. We know in 2016 that just running against Trump didn't work. And so I think we should try a different playbook.
What do you think the president's biggest strength is?
He's got a rock solid base. And the fact that his numbers really, no matter what he does, he can go out there and say the most ridiculous things, his comments about bleach or whatever. And, the numbers barely budge. And I think that is somewhat surprising. You would generally think, oh, wow, those types of comments could really hurt someone. And there's some evidence that some of the ridiculous statements in these briefings have hurt him. But the strength of his base is probably his biggest strength.
Do you, who is, so the obvious question now that everyone's thinking about is who's going to be his running mate, who should be his running mate, who might be his running mate? I mean, what do you think he needs in a running mate? And I'll ask you a couple part question here. Maybe you could answer it in some. What does he need in a running mate? What matters in a running mate these days? It used to be regional concerns. Our theory, and my theory, is that matters a little less now. And who do you think would be a good running mate?
God, I hate the.
Do you agree with our yeah. theory at first, which is the regional concerns don't matter as much anymore?
Yeah, I do. I mean, look, Joe Biden, look at Barack Obama choosing Joe Biden in 2008. I actually think that that's probably the best model for 2020, especially as we're going through this global pandemic. If we want to make the case that Joe Biden, he's empathetic, he's compassionate, but also that he's serious, and that he's going to govern in a more serious way than Donald Trump, I do think that we need to put experience, judgment, competence, very much forward in this election. And we need to have someone who does seem like they're ready on day one. I do not have a favorite in this. I honestly, I think the Veep stakes is very overrated. If you look at the past bunch of elections, vice presidents don't sway these elections. It's the top of the ticket that really matters. But, I think that Kamala Harris comes as someone who is very prepared. I think Amy Klobuchar comes as someone who's very prepared. Someone that's sort of intriguing from a little bit different experiences, Gretchen Whitmer, but she's someone who's next generation. She's a governor who has been on the front lines of handling the coronavirus crisis. And so I think that she could be an intriguing voice as well. But we've got a number of amazing women that I think we can choose from. But my general bias would be toward, some experience and an ability to prove that you're ready to deal with a crisis on day one.
You saw firsthand some of the divisions in the Democratic Party when Pete Buttigieg was kind of relentlessly hit for taking money from multi-donors, fair or not. What do you think this says about the party's ability to unite? And are you concerned about kind of the Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren wing of the party energetically getting behind Biden?
So I'm not worried about the Elizabeth. I think that the Elizabeth Warren wing of the party was actually overlapped a lot with Pete Buttigieg voters. You didn't necessarily read that a lot in the media, but we had a ton of overlap. And ultimately, I think there's attacks about, donors. Pete won Iowa, almost won New Hampshire. Joe Biden's the nominee. So clearly, I think that that's more of a Washington insider conversation. But it is going to be very, very important to get the people who stayed home in 2016 or voted for Trump in 2016 to vote for Joe Biden. But those aren't all, Bernie Sanders voters. There are a lot of Democratic voters that sat on their hands in 2016 just because they felt like, Hillary Clinton wasn't speaking to them, wasn't giving them a reason to go out and vote for them. And so, yes, it is going to be really important for us to show that we are listening to the Sanders wing of the party and to make sure that Bernie is truly invested in campaigning for Biden, which it seems like he is. And early on, I've been surprised by how much he's been doing for us. But I think we also need to look to the voters who did sit at home in 2016 and figure out how do we communicate to them? How do we communicate to them directly and get them to turn out to vote for Joe Biden?
I think one of the biggest other issues that we've been following closely is Tara Reade. She's obviously accused Joe Biden of sexual assault. How do you grade the Biden camp's response? Is there anything more that they should be doing?
I think that they've learned, and I wrote about this in my op-ed, that they've learned from the lessons of the past, that even if, it seemed like major news organizations had looked into this allegation, hadn't found it credible, there was no real corroboration for it, they could have continued to ignore it. We saw in 2004, John Kerry sort of ignoring the Swift boat attacks and letting them fester. We saw the same thing happen in 2015, 2016 with Hillary Clinton and her email server. Joe Biden seems to have learned the lessons of the past that you got to nip these things in the bud. And I think he did a good job with that. He went out there and forcefully denied it. And, nothing more has come out. Of course, partisans will still continue to push this against him, but it's important to me and I think it's important to Democrats to see that he has that ability, that he will not let the Republicans and I think bad faith actors on the Bernie left sort of push these BS attacks against him, and that he has the willingness to fight back and nip them in the bud. And it's going to be important, really important going forward, that they sort of take this example and even respond a little bit faster. The Tara Reade thing was out there for a few weeks, and maybe now in the future when we see an allegation like this, Joe Biden will be responding in a matter of days rather than weeks.
You worked for Bill de Blasio. You're a New Yorker, at least an adopted New Yorker, right? So how do you grade his performance in this whole thing?
You guys, you guys keep asking me to grade people as if I'm like—
Don't grade people then. How do you think he's done? Don't grade him.
I do not think he has done well. And I don't know a single person who thinks he has done well. He has, I think this is where crises are, where you really see who has what it takes to be a leader. And, you've seen it, I think, with Andrew Cuomo, who now, according to the last poll I saw, is the most popular politician in America. And he's really risen to this challenge. Bill de Blasio has really shrunk away from this challenge. And he is not led by example, going to the gym, hours after he's already told people to sort of stay at home and not go out in public, driving 11 miles to Prospect Park when he has a park right next to his house. And he's telling New Yorkers not to engage in non-essential travel, saying that we're going to have the 4th of July fireworks, or that we're going to have a ticker tape parade when we open up the city. Like, come on. It's just, I think that this is a good lesson for New Yorkers, that maybe our next mayor, we should really put competence as the number one thing for our next mayor. And I don't think that will be a hard sell after the job that Bill de Blasio has done over the last few months. But I would say this, he has shrunk, but Governor Cuomo has risen to the occasion. There are tremendous challenges in New York. And what's notable, I think, about Governor Cuomo's leadership is that, unlike Donald Trump, he's willing to admit when he makes mistakes. He's willing to sort of reverse course on actions and to take blame when things don't go right. And it's been a striking contrast with both Bill de Blasio and Donald Trump.
Who do you think the next mayor of New York is?
I'm not. Oh boy, that's the last thing I'm going to jump into. But there are some names out there. I think it's not going to be. I think it's going to be someone who understands that the job of mayor is not being some national ideological figure, right? It's not going to be someone who likes just going on the national shows and throwing out, ideological bombs. It's going to be someone who understands that the job of mayor is really being a competent municipal leader, and also being someone that loves being mayor, right? Doesn't try to spend every waking minute of his existence outside the city of New York. And we need someone who lives and breathes New York City and is the city's biggest advocate.
All right, we are quickly running out of time, but we want to get a couple of audience questions in rapid fire. So we'll start with one. Is pretty good. Democrats have been struggling to build a bench for a few cycles now. You've been in the trenches trying to make that happen with Pete Buttigieg. Do you think the Biden administration is when we finally see this next generation rise up via appointments?
Well, I think that's a really, really good question. And it is my fervent hope that 2020 is the last cycle we see where we have two septuagenarians, running as the major party candidates. And I think Joe Biden will be a fantastic president. I'm excited to vote for him, but we do need to pass the torch at some point. And so I would love to see, and we've seen this, the Biden campaign has been leaning heavily on, Pete Buttigieg, who's all of 38 years old, and full disclosure, obviously I work for him, to campaign for him. But the cabinet, first starting with the campaign trail, that's an amazing place for the Biden campaign to really elevate the next generation of leaders, people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, whether it's Pete Buttigieg, Andrew Yang, Gretchen Whitmer, and the cabinet is even better, right? If Joe Biden wins, to really make sure that he is looking toward elevating the next generation of Democratic leaders. Because we do need some new blood in this party. And we've got so many amazing people, in Congress, in the Senate, but also governors on the state level, on the municipal level, that we really should be elevating to make sure that we continue and always are the party of the future. And that's sort of what the Democratic Party has always been. And we shouldn't, let this election take us backward in that regard. And I really do think that we've got a lot of great potential nominees, next generation nominees, that Joe Biden can be lifting up.
One more question, then we'll let you go. What are you up to besides working for Pete? I think you're still working for him. What else are you going to be doing now?
So I'm working
to figure that out.
Yeah, yes, I've got some projects that I'm working on. That's why I'm upstate. I've been doing a lot of writing and things like that, but nothing I'm ready to announce at the moment. And I give a lot of advice. I give advice to anyone who asks for it. Any, elected official, politician, candidate. And so I've been doing a lot of that, and a lot of running and a lot of hiking.